So I'm excited about this panel, especially because I'm also a former United States Army officer. So knew that would get some attention. So I think when we've talked about whistleblowers and some of the different populations, the people at the Department of Defense, in the uniformed services, even some of the civilian employees, they're subject to different rules, laws, and their lack of protection, I think, has been particularly of interest to us. And we've had a group that's been very interested in us trying to do more to understand the nature of military whistleblowers and what they go through. So I want to introduce Richard Brookshire and Black Veterans for Justice. And I'm going to let Denise introduce herself and her organization. But both of them are working on, I think, areas where we see discrimination and harassment and the inability to report that. Paul Sullivan was on your agenda. He has come down with bronchitis. He's very sick, so he didn't even want to be on Zoom today. And he was going to talk, though, about veteran claim sharks, because there's also a lot of fraud in people filing claims for disability benefits, not the veterans, but these unscrupulous, they're lawyers. Some of them aren't even lawyers, they're advocates, they're representatives who are not accredited by the VA, they're not certified, and they take advantage of especially elderly, disabled veterans who really don't know that you should be able to process your claim for free from the Department of Veterans Affairs. But I'm going to turn this over to you guys now. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves and tell us about your story and what you're looking at.
Hi, everybody. My name is Richard Brookshire. I'm an Army veteran. I served for 7 years as an infantry combat medic, went to the war in Afghanistan. I transitioned in 2016, and on paper, I think most would have thought that I made a pretty seamless transition. I graduated from Columbia University, where I studied urban and social policy, and got a great job in city government straight out the gate. And I then fell into a major depression in my transition. And I sought out care from the VA, and left and right, I was kind of turned away. And unfortunately, within a year, I had lost said job. I was on the verge of homelessness, couch surfing, and my depression had worsened to a point where I had a suicide attempt. And it was in the psych ward when I was recovering from that attempt, and thank God that I survived it, that I read a book. I had read many books because that was all that I had to do in the 2 weeks that I was there. But the book was called When Affirmative Action Was White. It's by Professor Ira Katz-Nelson out of Columbia, and it looks at social welfare policies at the kind of turn of post-World War II, and the GI Bill being one of them. And it talked about the obstruction of the GI Bill and how it affected returning Black GIs. And I knew from my time in that transition period after I'd gotten out, where so many veterans often fall into despair, that I was interacting with generations of Black vets going back to the Vietnam era to the present day. I remember going to an event that was being hosted by New York City's Department of Labor for unemployed vets, and it just struck me that the vast majority of folks in the room were Black. And many of them spoke about experiencing homelessness and incarceration. And so it became very clear to me that there was this fraught history, but also very clear present day disparities. And as I sought to think about how I could be of utility and how I could use the pain that I was experiencing, I birthed something called the Black Veterans Project. So the Black Veterans Project is in its 5th year as of this November, and we've done some remarkable work. Over the course of the last 5 years, we established a partnership with Yale Law School. They have a very esteemed veterans legal clinic. And for over a year, we worked very closely with them to set up a series of very robust FOIA requests to look at internal VA data going back for the last 20 years to try to substantiate what we knew Black vets in large part suspected, that there were gross racial disparities in the allocation of disability benefits. And why that was important was not only because there was a need to address that issue, but there was also a need to build a case for reparations. A case for reparations, when you think about the legacy of obstruction of veterans' benefits that go all the way back to the 1940s, and compounded, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars, even in the last 20 years, but even more so when you talk about the preceding decades, tens of billions of dollars siphoned out of the hands of Black patriots who did their duty, who came back and weren't afforded the equal access to housing, education, vocational disability compensation, and a host of other benefits that so many of their compatriots are afforded. And so the work of the Black Veterans Project, and I'll get back to what we've been doing with Yale, has been to lay the foundation for not only a litigation pathway for repair, but also a legislative pathway. And so over the course of the last 3 years, we also began to organize a coalition working in tandem with a host of other Black veterans organizations for the first time in history to try to organize ourselves as a body. Because I think another note that is very important to add into this conversation is the complete neglect of storied veterans organizations who have a duty to serve Black veterans, but often don't. Race has been a blind spot in this community. And it has also been a blind spot within the Department of Veteran Affairs. And so our work has been to try to bring that to the forefront using research and storytelling and national reporting. And over the course of the last 5 years, we went from, if you Googled Black veterans 5 years ago, you'd see very scant reporting on any of these issues. And now you see all of our work populate. You see news hits from everything from NBC News to CNN to NPR to Washington Post. And it's because we wanted to bring national visibility to this history and build a case for repair. And so just to give a little bit of note about the litigation and legislative pathways. One, the FOIA litigation was successful. We were able to actually prove that there was sustained and systemic disparities in disability compensation that specifically affected Black veterans, that every other racial group was not an outlier, that Black vets were the only outlier. And the disparity, in one statistic that I can pull, there was as much of a 30% disparity in PTSD compensation that Black vets were facing, and denial rates that Black vets were facing, right? And that the VA had known about it, that the VA had studied it, that the VA had suppressed these internal reports about these issues, right? And then now Yale has, and we essentially as a project lead the national storytelling effort, but Yale leads all the litigation because I'm not a lawyer. I'm just an advocate and a strong storyteller. They have issued a landmark lawsuit called Monk v. US. And Monk, I'll just tell a little bit of the story of Conley Monk. Conley Monk was a Vietnam veteran. He served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. He got into an altercation at the end of his second tour with an officer who called him a racial epithet. An officer that, who was also became addicted to heroin during his time in Vietnam. And anyways, long story short, he got the dishonorable discharge and he fought for 40 years to gain access to his benefits. And Conley is suing now, leveraging the data that we have, that we've been able to garner through our FOIA requests, to say that, hey, the VA owes me compensation dating all the way back to 1971 when I got my dishonorable discharge, and for damages. But he's also suing on behalf of his deceased father. His father was a World War II veteran who did not get access to the GI Bill when he returned. And so when we talk about the compounding generational harm, Conley's story is a really important one. And now Yale is going to begin a collaboration with Harvard Law School, and they've already started to expand these FTCA claims. So they're filing claims under the Federal Tort Claims Act to try to get compensation for these Black vets who've faced discrimination in accessing the broad benefits that they should have had access to. And then the last point I'll speak about is our organizing efforts on the Hill around legislation. So I spoke about the Black Veterans Empowerment Council, this effort to try to organize the community for the first time. And it's, grassroots organizing is hard work. It certainly hasn't been easy, but we've made some headway. There's a piece of legislation that was introduced last Congress called the GI Bill Restoration Act. It's a piece of repair legislation. And what it seeks to do is to provide the descendants of Black World War II veterans who, by all accounts, less than 5% gain access to VA home loans and education benefits, right? And you're talking about the ability to buy a home is part and parcel to the building of generational wealth for so many. It is one of the biggest signifiers of the economic inequality that we see today. In part, is the wealth that was passed down through accessing that kind of public benefit. This bill would seek to give those descendants access to zero down VA home loans and education benefits. There's also another bill that's a kind of an offshoot bill. And that would seek to just give the VA home loans to direct descendants. And so we are champions of that bill and trying our best to organize around its passage. That's been the work to date around Black Veterans Project. But as we look toward the next 5 years, we're really wanting to begin to capture the narrative, because storytelling and the preservation of this history is so incredibly important. I think there's been so much to do around the renaming of bases, very good and very well. There's been so much to do about, advancing and honoring the legacy of folks like the Tuskegee Airmen or the 688 and all these venerated and justly so Black veterans. But that history of benefits obstruction and the cost to the community cannot be forgotten. And the forgotten soldiers, so many of whom will remain nameless forever, that history must be preserved, because it is such an integral part of the economic inequality that we see, and it is a disservice to the legacy of those patriots and of our national memory to not preserve that history. So that's the work of our project, and I'll pass it along.
Wow. Okay, there's some things you and I are gonna be talking about after this. So hi, my name is Denise. I was a Coast Guard veteran, and I usually ask this question when I do presentations, which is, right, who else is in the room? Do I got in the Army? Well, I know you're Army. I know you're Army. Anybody else here in the Army? Air Force? Hello. Okay. Navy, Marine Corps. Got it. And then I'm just gonna be snide, Space Force. Nobody? Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, I'm so sorry. I was Coast Guard. We're unicorns. We are.
They moved to the Department of Homeland Security now.
Yeah. No, we're not. Yeah, I know Space Force, and we'll go National Guard too. Yeah. Okay. So who am I? Let's see. Yeah, I'm a whistleblower. I became a whistleblower 12 years ago when I wrote what I thought was an appropriate letter. Because at that time, I was the Chief Counsel of the Maritime Administration. And for folks who don't know what MARAD is, it's an agency under the Department of Transportation, and it's responsible for one of the 5 federal schools. 4 of the schools, actually 3 of the schools, are in the Department of Defense. That's the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army. Then you have Coast Guard Academy that's under DHS, and you have the Merchant Marine Academy under DOT. And students that graduate from the Merchant Marine Academy go to sea as civilians, but they're also required to take a military, there's a military tie. They either go active duty or they go reserve. And when I became Chief Counsel in 2009, I started becoming aware of sexual assaults that were occurring at the school. So there was student on student, professor on student, and industry on student sexual assaults that were going on. And I say industry on students because one of the requirements to graduate from the Merchant Marine Academy is to go to sea. Not to go to sea as in the military, but to go to sea in the merchant fleet. That's your civilian fleet. They're the ones that get you your books and your postcards and your tables and your clothes and whatever. They're the ones that transport it. So anyway, became aware of sexual assaults. Male, female victims. And a whistleblower came forward and said, hey, we got some problems. There are students that are being sexually assaulted and they are afraid to say anything. Okay. And I had heard of things I asked to speak to the whistleblower. So whistleblower got on the phone with me, and it was me and my deputy chief counsel and my other lawyer. And I said, tell me your story. So the whistleblower told me their story. And based on information I had already known, I decided to write a letter. And actually, but this is what happens to the federal government when you're the chief counsel. You tell one of your lawyers to write the letter for you. And so I sign it. So it's essentially a letter to the Inspector General of the Department of Transportation saying that I have become aware of financial improprieties and possible criminal activity. And that I, as Chief Counsel of the Maritime Administration, am asking for an investigation. Crime's happening. My responsibility is to solve it, right? Well, that's kind of what I thought. So I went upstairs after sending that letter electronically and keeping a paper copy because I am a lawyer by training. Always keep your paper copy. And I went to the Department of Transportation General Counsel, whose name was Bob Rifkin at the time, and I said, "Hey, Bob, just want to let you know, I have sent a letter to the IG asking for an investigation." And he was busy doing something else. And it was like, And I said, "No, listen, Bob, pay attention. I have sent a letter to the IG asking for an investigation." "Okay, that's fine." So the next day I get a phone call and I get told that Ray LaHood wants to see me. Ray LaHood was the then Secretary of Transportation. So I go upstairs and his secretary is like, "Oh no, Ray doesn't want to see you in person. He wants you to get in the phone calls." I'm like, "Oh, okay, fine. What could possibly be wrong? A crime is occurring and I have, asked for an investigation." Oh my goodness. I got into my conference room with another person. To this day, nobody else knows who that person is, but I do. And got screamed and yelled at and told that I was incompetent and I was in need of supervision. How horrible could I be doing these things? I was ruining the crown jewel of an institution. What the heck was I thinking? And I'm thinking to myself, well, crimes are occurring, sir. You mean, what was I thinking? Rape is a crime. At least I thought it was. Yeah. So that was literally 12 years ago next week. Yeah. Yeah. And I was told at that point in time that I was pretty much incompetent, that I was to have nothing else to do with the academy, and that I was to go into a corner and pretty much color with crayons. Okay, that's great. That's great. And then there's something I learned about inspector generals. LaHood told the inspector general not to do the investigation, and he didn't do it. Hello, that woke me up. Wait a second. You have an inspector general and they don't do the investigation and we got crimes going on? Yep, that's exactly what happens. Yeah, so that would be, that was September of 2011. And then I get a phone call after coloring for about 4 months. I am being snide for a reason. And I get told, "John Bakari wants to come upstairs." Okay, I go upstairs, trot myself up. And John says to me, "The secretary has lost confidence in your ability to leave. You have a choice. You can either be fired today or you can promise to submit your resignation and we'll give you 3 months paid leave." Yeah. Hey, guess what I forgot to tell you? I was the main breadwinner for my family. My husband was a stay-at-home dad and I had 2 kids. So I chose resignation because, I have to put some food on the table for my family. Now, here's the fun part when you're a whistleblower at the level that I was at. Ethically, because I was a political appointee in the Obama administration, I was a Democrat. All of the ethics attorneys got to look at every single job that I applied for. You think I got a job during that 3 months period? No, didn't. So then, by the way, there is a reason I'm going to go chronological because it gets even better. So then Senator Gillibrand decides to hold hearings in 2013. And it was an amazing picture in the Washington Post. Yeah, it was epic. I was like, oh my God, it was every single service chief and their lawyers. And they're all with their hands up, swearing that they're telling the truth and nothing but the truth. And they're all saying, it's fine, everything's fine. There's not a problem with sexual assault in the military. And I looked at that. I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? Okay. And then that was about the same time that there was a rape case at Annapolis. And the defense attorneys in court were asking the victim whether or not she felt like a whore. And I'm sitting there like, excuse me, what? You're asking a midshipman whether or not she feels like a whore the day after she's been raped? I'll kiss my ass. So I wrote an essay that got me an invitation to go testify. And it essentially said that the title was "Female Military Personnel Aren't Whores." Because ladies, I wasn't a whore in the military and none of the female military officers are whores. We just got a bunch of idiots calling us for us. So January, I get invited to testify, and it's magical. And magical because we're all saying the same thing. So it's January 2014, and we're all saying we support Senator Gillibrand's legislation. Well, if you're in my type of world and you're a lawyer and everybody's saying the same thing, you're kind of like, well, this isn't normal. So I go up to the organizers and it's like, well, where's everybody else? And they said, oh, well, that's the next panel, but we're not going to let you see it. Well, by this time, I'm already a whistleblower and I'm already mouthy. So I tweet, well, this is a whitewash. That gets picked up by US News and World Report. And then I get another invitation to testify. This time C-SPAN is there. And that's what I learned, that you can say on C-SPAN that you were given an illegal order and nothing happens. That's when I learned that spring that Washington Post can put you on the front page of the Washington Post and reference you and nothing happens. Because I specifically said, I asked for an investigation. So that's January 2014. About 2 years ago, Midshipman X comes out. I don't know if you guys remember her story. She was a midshipman at the Merchant Marine Academy, and she decides to tell her story of a rape aboard a Maersk vessel. And she pretty much shatters everything. And all of a sudden, people have to start waking up. Okay. Now, but why do I then go talk to a lawyer? Because I've created the trail. I talked. I kept the letter. I wrote everything. So there are a couple of things I'm going to tell you as I talk about my story is create the paper trail. Because you've got to have it to prove it. So yes, I testified, and it's in congressional testimony of what I did. That's good. I kept the letter. I decided to share my story with a very lovely lady. Her name is Colonel Lisa Carrington Furman. It's in a book. This book's in the Library of Congress. This book is now in a lot of different university libraries. My story is going to be told forever because I ensured that it was there. So that's one of the lessons I would say to all of you who are whistleblowers. Write it, publish it, stick it in a library. Okay. Second thing I'm going to recommend is get yourself elected. Now, why am I going to do that? Well, because of something you said a second ago, and you were talking about litigation in the VA. So back in 2014, after everything goes down, my husband decides he wants to run for Congress. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? This is an adventure. Why don't you run for Congress, sweetie, here in Washington, D.C.? And while you're doing that, why don't I run for elected office too? I'll run for this little itty bitty job called an A&C commissioner. Well, if you're here in Washington, D.C., you know A&C commissioners usually do nothing more than like transportation, and I can look at your liquor license and whatever. Yeah, that only happens if you're the normal A&C commissioner, not me. About 5 months into my first year being an A&C commissioner, my neighbor was violently raped by a serial rapist. Yeah, he was pretty bad. By the age of 22, he had raped a lot of people. And he went for my neighbor. So based on everything I'd already known as federal government chief counsel and everything like that, I became besties with the U.S. attorney and said, you're going to prosecute this case, because they arrested him. And the guy was sentenced to 60 years in jail. Okay. Win for me. But there's a reason there's a case that's also in the books called Krepp versus the United States, is because I asked what I thought was a simple question. How many rape cases are prosecuted in Washington, D.C.? And the U.S. attorney looked at me and went, I don't know. And I said, well, that's kind of a crazy answer because I know that truth. So I asked again, appealed it. And then I FOIA'd it. And I sent the FOIA appeal. And they're like, we don't know. Like, you've got to be kidding me. We've got rapes, homicides, robberies, whatever, and you have no idea what crimes are committing? Okay. So as an itty bitty little A&C commissioner who doesn't have a staff, who doesn't get paid, who spending way too much time doing this, I get a friend of mine to help me sue the United States. Yep. I sued the United States and I got the data. And I got it in a very fascinating way because Senator Grassley came to me and said, well, this is crazy because I live on Capitol Hill and my neighbors work for Senator Grassley. So I learned, A, get yourself elected, B, go to the Mommy Network. I'm part of that. And on the playground, very loudly say, does anybody know a lawyer who wants to help me sue the United States? Yep. Hello. Hands went up. And by the way, it was nonpartisan. I had lots of lawyers. Let's sue. Okay. Because this is my neighborhood. So get yourself elected and sue. Oh, and by the way, guess who the judge was? The newest Supreme Court justice. That's not what I expected in life. Okay. But let's go back to FOIAs and things like that. You can also FOIA the VA. So again, VA doesn't know who I am. They're just like, well, this is a random elected official. So I went to the VA and said, hey, you know what? I want to know how many MST claims you got. They're like, oh, it's an elected official. We got to respond to this elected official. Whistleblower, me. They gave me all the data. So you need to get yourself elected, because then you use your title for whatever you want. So it doesn't matter, you don't have a staff. It doesn't matter that you're not getting paid. You have a title. Use it. Use it for everything you possibly can. And then you use your title to get others elected. But that's the trick here, folks. Get yourself elected. It doesn't matter, you can be dog catcher, but you use that title, okay? All right, then the next thing you do is you use positional power. Everybody's got a voice, use it. Now, Richard right here was talking about some things that, well, we've overlapped. So my full name is Catherine Denise Rucker Krepp. If you're Army, then you know what Rucker meant. And up until about, I don't know, April of this year, there was an Army base named after one of my cousins. I used my positional power as a family member to take it off. Use everything you got in life. Use your name. Use your gender. Use what I did at one point. I was pregnant. And I was like, I'm only going to get fatter and meaner. Use what you have in life. And after that child was born, when I was on the Hill and I had to negotiate, I had a 2 sugar cookie rule. Everybody thought I was crazy. I was like, she's 18 months old. If we don't successfully negotiate, I'm giving her 2 sugar cookies and then letting her scream. But you take what you have in life and you make lemonade. And I say that because we're all in this room because of whistleblowers. But take everything you have as positional power and use it. So that's my story. But dude, looking forward to this conversation. What else can we talk about?
I would love to have a conversation with the audience at this point. Yes. Yeah. Or no.
A question for each of you. Do you cover mental health, the lack of mental health, especially for Black vets, especially for those that are older, where they did not have access to various diagnoses, PTSD, what have you? Do you address that?
Mm-hmm. So the part of our advocacy led to a government accountability office study that looked at disparities in VA disability compensation writ large over the last decade. And so it confirmed a lot of what we had already found out through our FOIA request. So that is just kind of starting, and the VA is standing up a leadership panel to begin to address the disparities. So I would think that a lot of this will kind of play out in the coming years about like kind of what resources are now going to be infused into the community, what kind of targeted efforts are going to be made. We're still trying to organize ourselves really at the grassroots level. And, you know, Black Veterans Project is now going through a strategic planning process too, not only to just think about how we do storytelling efforts, but also like, how can we be present in community to provide wellness? We don't want to turn into a direct service delivery organization, but there is opportunities to create spaces for healing. And, you know, did my mic go? Okay. But I think the Black community also has a more fraught relationship with mental health, right? And so, but we experience pain at the same levels, right? So it's about language, it's about cultural sensitivity, it's about cultural competency. And I think the VA still has a long way to go by way of like being able to reach the community where it's at on that issue.
Yes. All right. So let's talk mental health. Because I've felt in the past couple of weeks that I keep getting gut punched. One of the reasons I'm talking today, and one of the reasons I've been talking more recently is because of what's been going on at the Coast Guard Academy. So if you've been reading the stuff at the Coast Guard Academy, apparently they were not prosecuting crimes. That's great. Now why does that matter? Because I'm not a Coast Guard Academy grad. I was active duty in '98. Every bad thing that they learned at the Coast Guard Academy, they then brought to Coast Guard headquarters where I served, and then they went out to the fleet. So when you have a commandant, and to her credit, I give her a lot of credit when she says, we own it. Well, thank you, ma'am, for owning it. But I am a 50-year-old woman who was sexually harassed 24 years ago. So you can own it, but what do you think that's doing to my mental health right now? Every time CNN comes out with a story, and I was like, oh my God, the stories are going to come. And the phone calls that I'm having with my friends, and it's all coming back after 25 years. So yeah, mental health is important. It's important for everybody who lived in the bad environment. And it's got to be addressed because it didn't just stop when we left headquarters. We have carried that baggage, in some cases, 2-3 decades. So yeah, we got to deal with that one.
Mention that I'm going to say the veterans of foreign war, the American Legion, are not receptive. So, but again, I'm listening to Denise talk and think there's a bunch of techniques for you, Richard, to try to get open their ears.
Yeah.
I'm a veteran, so I was a member of Veterans for Peace for a while, and I realized that one time I didn't care about this should go ahead. Just because one of the Veterans of Peace was, well, we have to be a fifth column within these other organizations if we're going to try to change them. But they have a few members. You can, if you work together, these organizations, they have to respond.
Yeah, I think there's certainly opportunity to start to collaborate more robustly with these kind of more storied, entrenched veterans organizations. But I think we had to kind of build it from the grassroots and own it ourselves as a community. Because, DC, the political game in DC, just how things flush out in the wash of things, often interest can shift. And ultimately, I think that on matters of race, there's just been a lack of courage on the part of a lot of these organizations to do what they know to be right, and just being able to even outwardly express not only the need to address these outstanding, racial disparities, which shouldn't have taken me as a 30-year-old returning vet with not really any policy experience outside of graduate school, but just a really difficult lived experience and a desire to want to try to do something to move mountains to try to get the issue to have some level of attention paid to it. Right. There's these actors with hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal who intentionally saw these disparities play out for decades and ignored it. Right. And so I'm cognizant of that. And I think that, when I had an opportunity to testify about it was draft legislation, but it's called the VA Home Loan Forever Act. So that bill that I was talking about, trying to extend VA housing loans to descendants. And I want to say it was the American Legion came out and testified alongside me, but they used very soft language. So they weren't against it, right? But they were very much, just playing political semantics with we're not in opposition, but we're not for, right? And I'm just this is still a lack of courage, right? And so I don't know what the answer is to that. I know that I'm sometimes a little bit of a disruptor, and I don't necessarily approach things through a political lens because I'm not looking for an appointment. I'm not trying to go work at the VA, and that's 90% of the folks in DC. You mean who are doing this kind of work, right?
Engineer, full of full powers to be engineers. I'm a licensed professional engineer. So after 9/11, I was at a major professional society table around the table systems, government affairs committee saying, shouldn't we condemn terrorist engineers as a training profession? And the answer was, I'll tell you the answer was, I think it's relevant to you. The answer was, we're not hearing that from enough of our rank and file members. We're not opposed to it, but look here. Of course, the thing we worry about at night is our membership. It's aging and shrinking.
Yeah.
And that's the case for veterans of foreign war, the element. So if you can,
Yeah.
but it would take relatively few members, particularly younger ones, to say we want to get on board with this.
Yeah. But it's also about like our ability to reach them as like a grassroots organization too, we have few resources as compared to a lot of these organizations. So I think there's certainly like opportunity, and we've recruited a new board who I think will be thinking more strategically about how we can kind of have a bigger footprint in the space. Coalition outside of just the Black veterans community, because I think it's really important to be able to get something like the VA home loan bill passed, or even the broader GI Bill Restoration Act, which, you know, they got reintroduced this Congress, and they're, you know, basically saying that it's could tentatively cost like $70 billion. Mind, we've given more money to Ukraine than that. But, you know, this is something to fix a generational harm. But it's like making the political case for something like that. It becomes really challenging when we can't even pass something like HR 40, which has been kind of on the floor for over 40 years at this point, to even study the issue of reparations in this country. So it becomes really fraught, right? But yes, I agree. And I think that there's still an open-mindedness to me as far as like wanting to engage with these more storied organizations. But there's also, if I'm being frank, like a certain level of like, I don't know if disdain is the right word, but kind of resentment that I even carry in like how I engage the broader veteran space, because I can see their complicity and their continued complicity as well. But yeah.
Counsel can't get that blown up by the IG, Coast Guard, or the Department of Homeland Security. About the rape issue.
Did one better. So I went to a friend of mine who was on the Hill, and I said, hey, Lucinda, I need you to write a letter for your boss and have him trigger an IG investigation. Her boss was Cummings out of Maryland. So yes, that was the card that I played there. Now, I'm going to share that with you, though, and I need you guys all to understand something, because I'm looking at you, and I'm guessing more than one of you has a kid in college, right? Kids in college right now? 2? Okay. The lessons I'm giving you right now, please use. And, you know, and I share this because I have a child that's a sophomore in college. The child's not a sophomore when this happened, but is now. The institution will not have your interest at heart. You are going to have to be the biggest mama bear you have ever been. And you play every single card. You have to. Because when a rape happens at a college, and it happened at Merchant Marine Academy, it can happen at GW, it happens anywhere else. The institution's first thing is going to circle the wagons. It is not going to be able to look after your child. So take care of your own. But for me, that's going to Congress and then doing some other things. But you got to play some cards. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Everybody in the end, for the 25 years, it was written in his charts that the VA still refused to give it to him. Then, when they decided to give it, they said that they were only going to give it to him for 1 year back. They were not going to give it back to him. It was supposed to. He has gone to lawyer after lawyer. Because he's a private. Granted by him now to the ultimate target. Came under that too. But it was just today that the VA called and said, we've gone over your case. And we're going to give you, which do you? We can't tell you how much it is yet, or you know, calculate it, but we can tell you that it will be as of today, this amount. Now, this goes when we talk about kids in college. Now, he's starting to receive things for his children that were denied. But in the process of this, because it wasn't until I did not know everything that's had to go through, and my heart goes out to you, part of our country, and for you to be treated the way that you do, it's horrendous. He got bit by it, bro.
He was fired 2 years ago. But it started off as a quarter staff. He went to VA doctor after VA doctor, and they left, they said, this will be in 2 months. We'll see you in 3 months. We will observe. 6 months later, they had taken all of the shit. The fang bites is now going into year 2 of this. They put him in the skin graft, and the venom has gone to his body so that it's gone in both of his legs, and there's a possibility that it will be amputated. So I know you said you're not a full service and you're not looking to do that. I asked about the advocate. I said, well, you decide on social work, you know. I said, where's your advocate? At the hospital. They make appointments and then they counsel.
They do.
And then the confidentiality 2 people. And I know you say demand for your rights and everything, but the thing is that it's racial disparity. I mean disparity between all of us, because if we do it, we're aiming. But if you do it, oh yeah, how did I give this to you? So what I'm asking is there any place where our Black veterans who fought for this country and who are still suffering? Nobody, it's medical malpractice. Everybody is saying it's medical malpractice. But nobody's coming up. Everything's happening.
VA has a new law now, or new policy. If they put him on, if he needs a specialist, and they put him on past the time when it would be medically, when medical necessity would say it needs to be more timely, he now has the right to get community-based service, meaning that he can get a specialist in his community, and the VA will pay for it.
But I'll say that even in community care, because I have to still navigate my own mental health care. And oftentimes with that, there's a lot of inconsistency through VA. And I more recently had asked for in community care, and they said, well, it would take months. So like even with in community care, it's not always as efficient, especially maybe perhaps it's because it's still being formulated in a lot of these communities. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I actually lost 2 uncles that one passed away in a VA hospital, and the other was trying to get care. And both of them passed away of cancer. They were trying to get care, but what they did was they kept them at the line. So that it's like, I'm giving you just enough so that they're below the threshold. So they were getting the appointments in just enough time, but the actual appointments would be like 15 minutes long after waiting 2 hours. And then you're not living your life the way we think you should live it, or this, and it's, well, he had a drug addiction from his time in the military and from serving, and then you're not helping. So they ended up going in circles, and the most recent one who died 18 months ago in the VA hospital, and he just never met any criteria to be able to get outside services. And then it was also, we're not going to pay for it, or other physicians don't want to take them on because it takes so long to get the medical records.
Yeah.
So there's so many things that go to that. So that's such a great question, because I know
People don't take the insurance that the VA provides. Yeah.
So you end up on this circle, and so it's, I've heard some people like Gaston, it's like, yeah, it really does happen. And then the family is there to watch all of this unfold.
Yeah.
Not only didn't they get all of their benefits their whole life, but then when they needed to stay alive, That's not there either anymore.
And then the claim guys with the veteran now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it does now.
Yeah.
The thing that I would suggest to your friend, go to your senator. Raise hell and go to your Texas. I would be senator and it works.
So can I,
Before, because I've never been on that before, because, family medically looking here. But it's been rough. I don't understand what is, people are scared.
There are many cases, exclude race, the VA is very, there's a lot of people trying to come into this system. And so it can go wrong. In a case similar to yours, I had one about a year and a half ago, where a white had headache. She goes to the VA hospital in Alabama. And the doctor says, well, I really don't know what it is, but there's medical equipment that we can do scans and figure out what the heck's going on. And I'll give you some, I don't know, that and the appointment. Husband's in South Korea. She's States of it. When headaches come back. And what happens is she called the husband, and the husband said, I want you to go to the VA hospital as soon as possible because there's something going on. But I had a headache. I don't know what to do with the kid, or do with my kids. Who's going to take me to the hospital? Pick them on to do it. Mother, 2 kids, in the way, in the car, that a mile and a half away from the VA hospital. And the kids actually watched the movie. They actually watched the movie. So, a month or 2 later, the service member's daughter gets headaches. By this time, the service member had a career in the Air Force. And he gave up his career in the Air Force because he had an infant. And he's crying there to us, saying, who's going to provide medical care? Who's going to provide the nanny that this poor child is still in diapers? I had to give up a 15-year career in the Air Force to take care of them. So what happens is the father and the daughter go to the VA hospital, and the chief of the residency family, and closes the door and asks the teenager to leave. I'm going to talk to your dad. Well, Doc's home, dad, and he said, sir, I am so sorry what happened to your wife. The emergency room doctor did not realize that the equipment that could have evacuated we had. We were unaware that equipment was available. So I feel sorry for you. The good thing that happened was the emergency room doctors know now that that equipment's available. So it's not going to happen to somebody else. And oh, by the way, there's a slight issue you want to consider. This was a civilian hospital. This was a civilian case. You'd probably be unemployment, or not unemployment, suit lawsuit for wrongful death. But because of the way our laws are written, you can't sue the government unless the government gives you permission to sue. And that's what he said. So, as a result, she got nothing, and the sergeant said, I want to care for my infant. What am I going to do? What kind of career, what kind of life am I going to live? Because that child needs somebody in caregiver. You're going to give me a caregiver? And they say, no, hey, you're on your own, bud. So what do you do? It's just, I'm not going to call it a racial issue, but I'm definitely call it a domestic issue where we need to take a look. What are we providing to veterans? Why does this man have to take care of an infant for the rest of his life? Why is his whole career down the drain? Or he's doing the right? Why did the emergency room doctor not utilize the equipment was in the whole person? That's the issue that needs to be addressed.
So I agree, like I said, I've just become aware of all, and I said that before I even made my statement. I don't understand how we can treat our vets the way that we do. It's
Okay. So, ma'am, can I make a couple of recommendations?
horrible.
So what I've heard is people expressing frustration, and I view this through a locally elected lens, which I was for 8 years. You have a senator, you have a representative at the federal level. You have a senator, usually, and a representative at the local level. You have a mayor. You have a lot of elected officials. Remember when I said the dog catcher could ask about MST claims? Every single elected person you have in your life could do the same. It does not have to be a U.S. senator. It does not have to be a U.S. House of Representative person. I did casework on the House, but it could be anybody. So leverage every elected person in your chain. Okay. I would do that. And ma'am, I think you were asking questions.
A process by which family members of World War II vets can let you know about them? And is it just in DC or is it nationwide, your organization?
The organization is a national organization. We are, so in about 6 months, we'll be launching a storytelling effort where we're trying to get families, affected families, and veterans who are still alive, who've been affected by this history, to come forward with their stories. And we're just trying to create the framework for that now. By way of being in support of the legislation, the offices that are spearheading it are Congressman Clyburn. So you can reach out to his office and just let his office know that you're very much in support of the legislation. How can you be supportive of that legislation? And then also Congressman Moulton are the two congressmen that are leading the GI Bill Restoration Act work. And I think to your point about there being systemic issues that affect all vets that are of great concern, I think that is very much true. But back to the conversation in the previous panel about intersectionality, often being another lens upon which we have to see the experiences. The systemic issues are often compounded for folk who happen to be Black in this country, and the statistics bear that out. And so it's not to say that other vets aren't facing issues in the system, but Black vets are disproportionately poorer. They happen to reside in urban centers that are disproportionately just not as well resourced in some ways for the VA, are underfunded by VA. And so these issues then get compounded, or they're overburdened, right? And not well staffed, and a host of other issues, right? And so I think those intersections become important. And so it's not to say that, we should only look at the issues that are happening within the Department of Veteran Affairs through the lens of race through our project, but it's about making sure that we don't erase that lens when we have the broader discourse.
Ask you quickly, you mentioned reparations for these claims that have been wrongly denied for decades. We still have veterans, and I think I told you I'm working on one of these cases, and I talked to Joe and actually Kimmel about it a little bit too. He's been denied since like 1968, where I've resubmitted the claim. I'm also in my spare time a claims agent. And so I cited that report. Can we use that report to say this guy should have been service connected in 1968? It's a clear and unmistakable error, and get him, or is there anybody looking at how, when we can make it happen, show that this was in the service treatment record, there was documents of the disability? Can we then go back and get that clear and unmistakable error and get him paid as a reparation for this wrongdoing, this wrongful denial? Can he then get that money if we can win the case?
Right. So the case that Yale is leading, I mean, it's a test case, right? Like we don't know what the end result will be, but they are looking for vets similar to the ones that you just mentioned, that they can go ahead and file those FTCA claims. So I can provide the information. If you're wanting to get connected, you can email me at richard@blackveteransproject.org or info@blackveteransproject.org. You can also find our email contact info@blackveteransproject.org. We have a host of different social media accounts. So you just Google Black Veterans Project if you need to find us, and you can certainly easily find our contact details. But I would just encourage those folks to reach out to Yale, and then they will file FTCA claims on their behalf. That takes about 6 months to process, and then they are open to litigation. And essentially what's happening is they're trying to create the groundwork for some kind of class action, but it's complicated. And so I don't know all of the different kind of moving pieces because I'm not necessarily leading in that work. My part of that work is the storytelling. And then obviously it's been the advocacy. And now Harvard Law School is going to begin collaborating on filing those FTCA claims so there can be greater capacity. But yeah, so if you have somebody who can go all the way back to 1968, but even certainly folks who have been affected even more recently, they are eligible to file these FTCA claims. And it's not a guarantee of any relative success, but we're trying to build some kind of possibility, and we'll have to see how it plays out. Yeah. Final words.
Yeah. Write your story down, please. Okay. That's my one takeaway for all of you. You all have a story. I don't know it. A lot of people outside this room don't know it, but you know it. So please write your story down. Doesn't take, much. You could, put it in your library, put it somewhere, but put it in a place where historians can find it at another point in time. Because we don't need it about 30 years now to be like, well, this is the first time this has ever happened. No, it's not. So write it down so people can find it and use your lesson learned. So thanks for listening to me.
All right, thank you both. I think these are areas where whistleblowing has had a historical, lots of focus, but not a lot of progress. And I think we need to figure out how to make more progress. I'm hoping the both of you will join us more in the future as we talk more about military whistleblower issues. And Denise, I thank you because I think our next and last panel of the day is going to join us, and it is about storytelling. And so I've often said that you need to own your narrative, and I'm going to call the next panel. We'll take about 5 minutes to transition panels. And I know a couple of you are here. I see you. Hopefully, is Heidi online? Did she ever join? Okay. All right, well, let's thank this panel and welcome our next panel.